So welcome back guys to We Talk Boxing, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Hamzah Sheeraz and his fantastic win over the weekend against Edgar Berlanga. Now, before I get into my opinion and where I believe he maybe should go next in terms of a future potential fight, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. Help us keep growing this channel. And for those that have subscribed, thank you. Now, for all those that watched the fight on the weekend between Hamzah Sheeraz and Edgar Berlanga, would have witnessed a potential superstar in the making, considering his last performance. Now, this was a fight for Hamzah where he took on the more experienced fighter at that weight, which is the super middleweight, 168, because this was his debut, Hamzah. This was his debut at this weight. So he took on a tough opponent. Most people would have favoured Edgar Berlanga to win, but Sheeraz had different thoughts, a different opinion. And what was phenomenal to see is that all the smack talk that Edgar Berlanga like I said beforehand, and in the interviews, how he was playing music every time Sheeraz was speaking, pretty much trying to say that he's a tall, lanky dinosaur sort of thing, kind of backfired, because realistically, if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk, and he didn't walk the walk. And as they say in my ends, you chat shit, you get banged, and he got banged at the end of the day. But yeah, it's Berlanga's second loss. A difficult one, I think this will be, because he got knocked out and he was down twice in the fourth round before the referee pretty much called it. So it's a case where does he go? Obviously, there will still be big fights there for someone like Edgar Berlanga because of his name, his reputation, but that's 2 losses in 3 fights now for him. And his last fight, prior to this fight, was a round where he quickly demolished the person. So you can't really call that a fight, really. But yeah, he was very disappointing for me. He was making silly schoolboy mistakes where, let's say, for example, him and Sheeraz were standing at range with each other. Sheeraz would maybe throw a couple of shots, but then Berlanga's leaning back with his chin in the air. And that was part of the reason why he got dropped the first time. And there was also a couple of times where he was overreaching for shots. Whereas as he was overreaching with his, let's say, his right hand or his left hand, then Sheeraz would just take that little half a step and then either follow with a right and then a left hook. And again, some of those shots in the earlier rounds were missing by a couple of centimetres, but those shots in rounds 3 and 4 were catching him. And that's the difference between, realistically, because it was just schoolboy errors, really stuff that he probably knows now watching that he made. But it was also a weird style that he was trying to fight. He was, for me, trying to box a better boxer, and I'm not saying he's far he's not as good as a boxer, but Sheeraz has got some good pedigree in terms of his hands, in terms of his combination punching, his speed. He's got a good jab, and Sheeraz looked comfortable. He didn't look as if he was getting out of gear at all. So he tried. For me, his game plan wasn't on point. He should have probably went in there really from the get-go, from round 1, tried to literally rough up Hamzah Sheeraz, maybe do a couple of little dirty things to him to put him off his game, and then as maybe Sheeraz is tiring, then try his boxing and maybe fake a few shots to land a big shot. So yeah, I think his tactics were all over the place with his schoolboy errors, which led to the downfall of him getting knocked out. But Sheeraz, perfect game plan, perfect fight. What a statement. People are now saying that he should potentially go in there with Canelo Alvarez. I still believe that is a mistake. Now, don't get me wrong, if Canelo Alvarez fights, when is it, September, against Terence Crawford, and he absolutely looks poor or he looks very old, then I'd say that Sheeraz has got a chance. But as we speak right now, I'd put not all my money, but I'd give it maybe a 70-30 split more in favour of Canelo Alvarez. I just think the schoolboy errors that Berlanga made, Canelo's not going to make. And Canelo's very durable. Canelo can take a shot, but the best thing that Canelo loves and what he loves against fighters is when they stand in front of him. And Sheeraz did that. Sheeraz thought, you know what, I'm going to stand there, I'm going to try and trade. And he got away with it because Berlanga's not as elusive or durable as someone like Canelo Alvarez. So, but I feel that would play into Canelo Alvarez's hands, and that's exactly what he would want. And he's very good at targeting the body, and he's got power as well. So whether or not Sheeraz could handle that, I don't know. But as I said, if Canelo looks old overnight, then he'll have a chance for me. But some good fights there for Sheeraz. He is a potential superstar. They are rebuilding him to potentially be one of Britain's next best prospects and champions. So it'd be interesting to see how he cooks. More like how he pretty much for me handles the next 18 months. I think that's going to be the big turning point in his career. And what I mean by that, it all depends on the caliber and type of opponents that Hamzah Sheeraz goes in there with, because he's at 168 now. Obviously, he wasn't successful at 160 of getting a world title, but he's ranked quite well, I'd say, at super middle right now. Number 5 with the WBO, number 10 with the IBF, and number 6 with the WBC. But these rankings will be updated and they will change, meaning that there's a potential there for Hamzah to maybe be able to push up the rankings to maybe rank number 2 or 1 or whatever it may be, to fight someone for a mandatory position once the belts get vacated, because we all know that Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford are fighting in September. That's for all the marbles. So I'm gathering, and I guess that depending on what happens in that fight will determine whether or not there's a rematch, and will determine whether or not some of the belts become vacated. Will it be interesting? But there's certainly some massive fights out there at 168 for Hamzah Sheeraz, and I believe he's gonna, for me anyway, he's gonna be up there as one of the potential forerunners in terms of maybe to capture a world title. But there are some decent names. Billy's there. He's looking really good. He's been trying to get a fight with Canelo Alvarez for years. You got is it Pacquiao? I can't even say his name. Diego Pacquiao or Pacquiao, whatever. But anyhow, he's looking good. I've seen him fight a few times. Decent fighter. You got Munguia. Munguia, obviously, after his loss and then fight against what was that French dude? Just on the rankings now. I can't remember the French dude's name, but the guy that beat him, I'm sure it's French anyway. But obviously Munguia tested positive as well, so that's all up in the air. You got Caleb Plant there as well, and depends what happens with Chris Eubank Jr. That is a fight that Hamzah Sheeraz has been after for a while. Now we know that at the minute, to date, that the fight between Junior and Ben has been signed for, I think, September, I believe. But we don't know what's going on. I'm hearing a few rumours that might not go ahead. Can maybe Hamzah Sheeraz maybe entice Chris Eubank into the ring? For me personally, I don't think. I don't personally feel that we would ever see that fight, because prior to this fight anyway, and prior to Hamzah Sheeraz drawing against Carlos Adames, I still would have had Hamzah Sheeraz beating Chris Eubank Jr. I just think that this time in Chris Eubank Jr.'s career, Sheeraz is not the right fight for him. The styles don't mix. He's too young, too hungry, too big, and too powerful for Chris Eubank Jr. If it was, let's say, 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago, then I probably would have said, okay, yeah, Chris Eubank Jr. would smash him quite comfortably. But Sheeraz is growing into the weight now, and is a very big contender for me anyway, to maybe try and capture some of these titles as well. And you've got Callum Smith obviously, floating around. Sorry, not Callum Smith, Callum Simpson. Sorry, he's a British guy as well, floating around. So it depends on what happens there. There could maybe be a good British dust up there for Hamzah Sheeraz. But do I believe at this stage that he will win one of those belts at 168? Yeah, I'm quite fairly confident as long as he doesn't get injured or like somehow lose his next couple of fights. I feel that he's got an opportunity because it depends what happens with the belts. The belts need to become vacant before he could potentially try and fight maybe the interim champion or the mandatory person who's there in the rankings. So, yeah. My thoughts in regards to Hamzah Sheeraz versus Edgar Berlanga. Yeah, I didn't think it would go that way. Um, I just thought maybe if there's going to be a knockout, probably would have been more Berlanga, but maybe Hamzah more on points. But Hamzah is filled out quite well in the weight, and he looks big, he looks strong, and to be honest, question marks whether or not he could potentially move up at some point again in terms of his career to 175. He probably could because he's got good physique, good dimensions. So yeah, there's an opportunity there for him. But these are my thoughts in regards to the fight. These are my thoughts in regards to where I believe he should maybe go next. I think his team will try and push for the Eubank, but that won't go down well with the Eubank's team. Meaning that his only other options are then going to be potentially try and fight other maybe top 10 opponents for now, or maybe one of the interim champions. But will I make him a favourite going up against some of those guys? Potentially, based on his last performance, yes. But there's some decent names in the division. But as always, guys, please subscribe and comment. Bless.